welcome to our well-populated group of people here today. We're going to learn a lot about Ted Williams and Ted Williams Camp. And Ed Leonard is here. He has been collecting information for a long, long time. And this will be a very, very interesting presentation, I think. So enjoy.
I'm in awe standing in front of a group because this is not typical of my history. And I think that Ted would be happy because about 75% of the people here are women. And he liked kids, but he also liked the women. I'll try to hold this up. Thank you, Lord. What happened was back in last September, I had a birthday, and my granddaughter gave me this book, The Wingman. The unlikely, unusual, unbreakable friendship between John Glenn and Ted Williams. And Ted Williams was the wingman flying in protection of the squadron leader in North Korea during the Korean War. And he would follow the leader as his wingman. That was his job. And the two of them became great friends. And they were an unlikely couple because they were totally different personalities. John Glenn, I don't think, ever swore, and I don't think Ted ever quit swearing. So anyway, in reading that book, there was one sentence in there that said, Ted would occasionally make a cameo appearance at his boys' camp in Lakeville. Now, 300 pages, and that's one or two sentences. And I'm saying, I only lived here at that time about 18 years now. I'm from Easton. But I'm saying, I had a barber by the name of Fred Correa.
Oh, yes.
And years ago, while I was getting a haircut, Fred told me that he gave Ted Williams haircuts. And I'm comparing that thought with what I read in the book, and I said, there's something wrong here. And Fred told me that Ted, getting a haircut, saw his fly casting rod leaning against the wall, and he ended up asking Fred if he was a flyman. And Fred said, well, I'm teaching myself. Ted took him out in the parking lot after the haircut and gave him a couple lessons. And that was pretty typical of Ted. He just fit into the community. He liked to be with people. So anyway, given that, and seeing the sign that I drive by on Precinct Street all the time, I started asking questions of people, what they knew. And it started off very innocently with one or two. Bruce Baptiste was one of my early contacts, and he gave me some information. I was at Nellie Rose's having breakfast one Friday morning, and there were 4 guys sitting there having breakfast, and I'm not bashful. 4 of them got up and I said, any of you guys know anything about Ted Williams? And one of them hung back and the other 3 left. And her name was Mary Standish. And Mary says, oh yeah, I knew him. Back in 64, 65, for a few years, I used to make a coffee frap and cook a double cheeseburger for him. He would stop at my wife and I convenience store. Yeah. And he would go in there and have his lunch when he left the camp in the 60s. And he would sit at a table and make conversation with people that are bringing themselves up to date on the local news. So that was another invite. I said, this is interesting. And it went on and on and on. I'm still gaining, and it's now exponential. It's exploding. And I think what I have learned about Ted and from the people that have given me these little stories, that there's really a story here that's never been told. It's part of his legacy, and everybody knows he had a legacy of playing baseball. And many people knew that he was a Marine pilot, honored with that, patriotic, happy to do it. The military was part of his life. He enjoyed the discipline of the military. So anyway, in order to tell the story of his legacy, you have to go back to when he was a child and how his life developed before he ended up being an owner of the baseball camp. And I start off by saying a personality profile. And as the years went on, these personality evolved. He was shy in the beginning, very active. He was embarrassed about his family. They were Mexicans, and he didn't have any nurturing from his parents. But he was very disciplined, became obsessed with hitting a baseball. And it's hard for me or anybody to know how obsessed somebody can become on something as simple as hitting a baseball. But he did. It became a focus of his life for his whole life. He became, then he was inquisitive. He was naturally intelligent. He asked a lot of questions. He was always learning. And as a result, he gained success playing baseball. He was getting paid for $5 on a Sunday afternoon with a local Legion team. You know, he's like 15 years old. He's in high school. But he's making $5 for a game. You got to remember, he was born in 2018. So in the crash, 19, yeah, correct, 19. So when the stock market crashed, that was 11 years later. He was 11 years old. People were now without income. There was a lot of people, but he was surviving through that, through the community in San Diego, and getting playing and getting paid for it in high school was pretty good. And he went on to be hired by the San Diego Padres on their team when he was just out of high school. And he would travel with them on the Pacific Coast League. And that's where he met Bobby Doerr and Johnny Pesky. They all ended up playing for the Red Sox. So anyway, he was doing so well that the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Cleveland Indians all picked up on this guy that was hitting the ball out of the park and hitting it often. He was very good at that. He wasn't a good fielder, he wasn't a good ball player, but he was a good hitter. And they had him pitching. He was pitching. They tried to make a pitcher out of him, but in pitching, he was learning something about pitching, and part of his career, he was always learning about pitches because he wanted to know what the guy was going to throw at him before he hit it. So he finally got hired by them. He was getting like, I think it was $150 a month back in the mid-30s. So it ended up the Red Sox hired him, and they sent him to some spring training down in Florida. Bobby Doerr was his escort on the way because he was underage. The Red Sox had to pay his mother $1,000 to sign a certificate that allowed him to go and leave town and play for the Red Sox. So, but it's pretty good pay. When he signed in with the Red Sox, he was getting $3,000 a year. But he was only at the spring training about 10 days. With all the success ahead of him, he was getting pretty cocky. He felt pretty good about himself. He wasn't shy anymore, which he was when he was younger. And he didn't think about levels of authority. Everybody was at the same level with him. He treated everybody the same. So when he saw Joe Cronin, who was the manager of the Red Sox baseball, he didn't say, "Hello, Mr. Cronin." He said, I'm trying to think what he said. "Oh, hiya, sport." And Cronin goes like this, "Who's this 19-year-old kid, cocky, calling me sport?" So within 10 days, Cronin sent him up to Minnesota for a farm team. What do they call it? AAA. They had a place up there where they could take young potential and develop them into ball players, and Ted needed it. He was he was off the wall in his personality. He was having a good time. He'd go out in the field and go, "Hi-oh, Silver," you know. Jimmy Pearsall thought he should have gone to the hospital with him. So anyway, up there he did very well. He was hitting the ball often, he was hitting it long, he melded right into the community. And this was in the town of Princeton. It's 30 miles north of Minneapolis. It was a small town. And when he was there, the season was over in September, he stayed on and went hunting and fishing. Now when he was a youngster, he did some hunting, but he was really into fishing as well. Fishing was as much of a hobby of his as baseball was. We always hear about baseball, but he was obsessed with fishing. So when he was up there in Princeton, Minnesota, as a 19-year-old learning to play baseball, he made a lot of friends with everybody there. Another thing about his personality, he didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he went to bed early, he exercised, he was a model kid. He didn't even date girls. He just played baseball and enjoyed people's company, but he never dated a girl. I think he took one to a high school prom. So anyway, that year he matured some, not totally, but some. And he ended up going the next year to play for the Red Sox in their first home opening game the year later. And right away he was playing good ball. But in the meantime, he had talked him out of pitching and said, "I'm an outfielder." And he wasn't a very good outfielder because he was tall, 6'3", and originally when he was with the Padres, he weighed 145 pounds, 6'3". So when he ran, his legs were going this way. He couldn't run very fast. They used to give him a head start. He'd hit a triple, lucky if he made a double, you know. So anyway, that's when things got interesting in his personality, because the war in Europe was coming to a head. And the Selective Service Board was created, and young men had to sign up and register for the draft. And after his first year playing ball in Boston, he went back up to Minnesota on vacation because he went back to visit his friends. He didn't go home because he had no home in San Diego. His real life interest was hunting and fishing back with his friends in Minnesota. So when they came out with the Selective Service Act, he signed up in Princeton, Minnesota. And they gave him a 1A classification, which meant he was draftable. And it was a lottery. Everybody didn't go in the Army on day one. They had a few here, a few more, and they trained him, they'd hire a few more. And he had kind of a high lottery number, so he didn't get drafted right away. But when he was playing then just before the Pearl Harbor and declaration of war, reporters for the Boston Herald, effectively, but there was a lot of newspapers, and the sports writers were vying to sell newspapers. And one of them came out and called him a draft dodger. And Ted was very proud of himself. He considered himself patriotic. He was loyal, he was well disciplined, and nobody was going to call him a draft dodger. So we've all heard that he used to spit at the audience and they would boo him. That was because his reaction to what the press wrote, and when the press wrote it, the people who read the newspaper believed it, so they were booing him. So that was the beginning of his problem. When he went back up to Minnesota, the second time, he met a girl by the name of Doris, and they romanced. She came down to live here in Boston. He ended up, right after the declaration of war, going to spring training in '42, because you have to keep in mind now, there was only one major sports league in the National Sports League in the country, and that was baseball. There was no football, no basketball, no hockey. It was only baseball. There were small leagues, but they didn't amount to anything. Baseball was national. And Boston happened to have two teams. They had the Braves and the Red Sox. So Ted was getting a lot of national attention because he hit that 406 high mark, which is a record batting average in 1940. So here it is, 1942, we're at war, everything is being rationed, but the federal government made a law that said we need some people to stay at home because of critical service. We also need to maintain a high morale in the country. And they said baseball is going to continue to operate for the morale of the country. And Ted was the top of the baseball thing. So they found that out up in Minnesota, and they reclassified him without him knowing it, without him requesting it. They classified him 3A because when he filled out the form, he made note that he was the single financial support of his mother. His mother was getting old. She was no longer active with the Salvation Army, and he was sending a lot of money home to her every month to keep her going. So when they found that out, he was playing baseball, they made him 3A, but that didn't get publicized through the press in Boston. He was still a draft dodger. So anyway, in that spring training of 42, he decided to enlist. He wasn't drafted, he was still 3A, but he decided to enlist, and there was a Navy pilot training program that he signed up for, and he and Johnny Kresge with him went out to Amherst, Mass, and they started to learn to be pilots for the Navy. And that's a couple interesting things happened up there. One is they tested him for eyesight. He had never been tested before. And they found out he had exceptional eyesight. He could see a baseball coming from 35 feet away where the average player could only see it at 20 feet away. So even though he was practiced and obsessed, he had an advantage that he had good eyesight too. And he knew what pitchers were doing. So when that ball left the pitcher's hand, he could see the spin of the ball and he could anticipate what he's going to hit. That's one reason he did so well. And Doris, we had met in Minnesota, followed him around, and he ended up being transferred down to Pensacola, Florida, and he was commissioned. He went in as an enlisted guy, but he did so well with his activity with the Navy, they made him a second lieutenant, and he graduated, and he was given the option of joining the Marines, whereas he had been in the Navy before that. And he wanted the Marines because he wanted active duty. When he was with the Navy, they made him an instructor of pilots down in Pensacola, and they didn't send him overseas or anything. He was just teaching other kids how to fly. But he finally graduated in 1944, and Doris stayed by his side the whole time. And 2 days after he graduated, the military allowed trainees to get married. So he married Doris in this little small ceremony in Pensacola, and on the honeymoon, guess where they went? Fishing in the Everglades. Doris didn't give a hoot about tit fishing. So that marriage was off to a slow start. And Ted was very open. He had three loves. He loved baseball, he loved fishing, and he loved his wife. In that order. And many of you, I'm sure, have been married or are married. There's always a little conflict in the marriage about who's making what decisions. And in Ted's marriage, he was making the decisions. And Doris kind of took issue with that. Well then, not too long after that, Doris got pregnant. And it was Christmas time in Boston, and she was in Boston and ready to deliver in a couple of weeks. He was fishing in the Everglades. She delivered 2 weeks early. They tried to contact Ted and took him a couple of days to find him out in the Everglades. And he says, "How's she doing?" "Doing fine." "Okay." Anyway, he found his way back. It was a week and a half late in getting here. What did you know? The press picked up on that. Said, what kind of a guy wouldn't be there when his wife delivered a baby? He was there. She was healthy. He was happy with the whole situation. And the baby's name was called Barbara Joyce, but she became affectionately known as Bobby Joe, because he wanted a boy, not a girl. So anyway, from that point on, he was discharged as a reservist at the end of World War II, but he was available for recall by the Marines, and lo and behold, the Korean War began, and they called him back to service. And he didn't really want, because he was back playing baseball again for the Red Sox. He missed 3 years during World War II, but he's back, and he's making good money. Now he's up making $20,000, $30,000 a year. And he wanted to play baseball. But they called him back, and within training now, they trained him as a jet pilot, because World War II, there were no jets. They were all propeller driven. But he was a natural pilot, had good eyesight, good reaction, and he was an excellent, excellent pilot. And they sent him to Korea, and that's where he met John Glenn, and had good results. Almost lost his life a couple times. Became quite sick a few times, lost some of his hearing, and he had a boisterous voice, but when you lose your hearing, you end up talking louder. So whenever Ted went anywhere, his voice would come through the door before he did, you know. So anyway, he got through the Korean War, and that was the second legacy. Now he's approaching a few years playing baseball, but in 1957, he's thinking about retiring. He's now still got a contract with the Red Sox, been there 17 years, and only got 3 years to go. And he's wondering what he's going to do for the future. And this is where the Lakeville legacy kicks in. There were a pair of Cassidys, Albert and Bernie Cassidy, 40 years old, the same age as Ted. And they had a brother-in-law, their sister's husband, Lester Warburton. And the three of them were businessmen. They enjoyed it. In fact, Albert had a small drive-in restaurant. I think it's the same restaurant that's down on County Street today, next to Bub's Marine. There's a street sign there that's existing that says Cassidy Lane, and it's right in the middle of the marina. The guy that bought the marina took the houses down and put more boats in, but they left the sign. So anyway, Ted was playing baseball, leaving the dugout, and Albert Cassidy had some discouraging inputs. The Boy Scouts of America owned all of this property where we sit today. It was like, I don't know, 140 acres. And they had had it since 1920, but they put it up for sale in 1957. And Al Cassidy wanted to buy it. And he went to a local bank, and they turned him down. He couldn't afford it, and they say a boys' baseball camp would never survive. Now, the elements of a baseball camp existed. The Boy Scouts had the lake, of course, and they had their activities around the lake, but they also had a couple of baseball diamonds, big fields that had been cleared. They had a dining room, which is now Loon Lodge. They had an office. They had some cottages. They had the makings of a baseball boys camp at that time. But the bank wouldn't let him. So anyway, he looked around some more, and he finally got Rocky Marciano, who was living in Brockton. And Rocky had retired, national champion of boxing. And he finally said yes, he would support it. So Albert went to the bank, and they said, now, we can't have a boxer promoting a baseball camp. So he wasn't going to give up. And they said, you should have a baseball personality. He put a proposal together. He drove into Fenway Park, talked his way down to the dugout, caught Ted walking out to the batting cage, hailed him over, and Ted, he liked to talk to people. He comes over, what can I do for it? And Albert says, I want to buy this Boy Scout camp and start a boys baseball camp. Oh, that's interesting. He says, I can't talk to you now, but I'll talk to you later. After batting practice, he went over, and Albert gave him the proposal. He said, I'm interested. He says, I'll call you later, but I'm going to play baseball. Albert went home and said, I'll never hear from the guy. At the end of the season, middle end of September, he got a phone call from Ted Williams. He said, I want to come down and see the property. So Ted now, he's making like $125,000 a year. He's divorced from Doris. He has a desire to do something in the future of his life. And he's driving down to this community of Lakeville, which is out in the country. I mean, Lakeville even today doesn't have a downtown. So he comes down and he's reminiscing about his good time with good friends up in Minnesota where he could go hunting and fishing. And here's a place where he could relax and be with people. And here's the beginning of a camp that he can get to. And within days, he stayed here with Albert, and I assume now that he met Bernie and he met Les Walburton, and the four of them got together, and Ted said, let's go to the banks. The same banks still turned him down. Ted says, we're going to make this work. I got a friend over at the Co-op Bank in Middleborough. They went over there, and right away the guy said, we're in. And Ted paid the down payment on the mortgage, which I think was about $12,000, because I think the property sold it for about $60,000. And then he sat down with Albert and the others, I assume, and he said, I'm putting a lot of trust in you guys. I'm willing to support this and make it a success, but you've got to hold up your end of the bargain. So now this is September of 1957. They had an open house for the first season for the boys' baseball camp in June of '58. And it was remarkable what those three guys did in those 9 months. The dining room was too small for 100, 150 kids. They used the office. They added a couple baseball diamond. The kids are going to come down and be overnight. They're going to live here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a lot of them, because some were locals, but the majority were coming from away. So they built a dormitory that was 135 feet long and 125 feet wide, had toilet facilities, had showers. Then they had to organize 100, they were expecting 100 kids, that first year. But if you think about a boys' baseball camp in the summer for 8 weeks, who's going to manage this thing? The natural is the local schools. Teachers are off in the summertime. They're looking for something to do. They needed organizers. They needed coaches, sports coaches. They needed medical nurses. They needed many of the talents that were available to them from Fall River, New Bedford, Fairhaven, Middleborough, Taunton. And they brought all of that together and got people signed up on it. Ted also brought in a few of his baseball buddies. Eddie Pellegrini came down for that open house, and he was a coach. One of his friends from San Diego, who he played with the Padres, was semi-retired. In the summer, he used to drive up here with his family and spend 8 weeks coaching at the camp. And there were others, people that attended the camp with Yogi Berra's son sent here. Haywood Sullivan for the Red Sox, he sent his son here. And many of the kids that went to the camp here became successful in their own lives. So Ted ended up at the open house, and they brought in a lot of the people that had signed up to play, and they brought in the local politicians and newspaper and like that. Nobody from Boston. Ted still wanted to keep himself out of the notoriety. So this whole thing was happening without any input from Boston. And it was successful. And then he came down. He had to take a couple days off from playing baseball because he came down for opening day. One of the interesting things was they were proud of was a pitching machine. Prior to that, the pitching machine was fired with a burst of air through a gun. but they hired the state-of-the-art pitching machine, which was a machine that actually threw the ball. One of the early campers on a Sunday morning went out there and started loading the machine up. The machine threw a ball and hit him on the head and cracked his skull and put him at St. Luke's Hospital. So they had to have medicine, they had to have, you know, all kinds of discipline. What are you going to do with 100 kids, 7 to 17 years old, and discipline them for 7 days a week, 24 hours a day? You had to keep them active, and you had to organize them, and you had to divide them into age groups. And it was just a marvelous thing that these guys did. And they did it for the 10 years that Ted was here. And then Ted was hired by the Washington Senators in 1969 as their manager. And he didn't want to go, but they finally convinced him by giving him a lot of money, and he left the camp in 1969. But from 1960, when he actually left the Red Sox, he lived in Lakeville for those 7 or 8 years. 2 of his 3 wives lived here with him. The daughter of his first wife came to visit. That was Bobby Joe. I have a Middleborough Gazette article that she was admitted to the St. Luke's Hospital, had a virus. One of my contacts, I've got 25 people that have signed on, knew him because they visited him at Mello's grocery store over on 105. That's Star Market today. But it was Mello's at the time, and Ted was observed shopping for groceries with his daughter, Bobby Joe. I learned from Nancy LaFave that she was Ted's private secretary one summer. In 1966, I think. She was a junior in high school, taking bookkeeping and that kind of thing, and Ted hired her, and she was opening his mail and doing things for him right on the camp out of that office. So I get to meet her. I'm saying, you know, there's a lot of little inputs. Bruce Baptiste said, I've got a book that they used to give to the campers. Oh, my lights is turning. Excuse me, hang on a sec. Oh. That booklet.
Baseball basics, yeah.
Baseball Basics. Every camper that came here got a copy of this. It's about 20 pages long. The first 16 pages are on how to hit a baseball. The other 4 pages is gaining strength, exercise, eating properly, taking care of your equipment, but it's also how to play baseball. Bruce gave me that. And then Bruce said, I knew of Ted. He didn't know Ted, but whoever gave him that booklet was in Middleborough, and I didn't realize it, but in 1958, Lakeville didn't have a high school.
They went to Middleborough.
All the high school students went to Middleborough.
Yes, we did. Here we are. We did.
Lakeville is still part of Middleborough, I don't care what you say. So anyway, Bruce told me that he sold a color TV set to Ted at the name of the furniture store, I can't remember, Fisher's or something.
Eggers.
No, it wasn't Eggers, no. Okay. So one of those. And Ted, I assume he had that TV sent over to where he was staying. I learned from Nancy LaFave that Ted was staying in the Lydia Roach estate over on Highland Road. Did I hit the button? Is that better?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I hit the off button. Anyway, Lydia Roach, a very wealthy single gal, inherited her family's estate over on Highland Road. And on that estate was a long, beautiful building called the Stone House.
Right.
And across that, up on the hill, was the guest house. And then she had her own hilltop farm at the top of the hill and barns out there with a lot of horses.
Big lake in front.
Yeah, that's right. Beautiful
And
view.
so it's my understanding that, she, and I know that Ted stayed in that guest house with his wife Lee Howard in 1962, his second wife. And that's when Bobby Joe visited, that's where she stayed. So I'm assuming now that that whole time from 1958 to 1968, he was staying there. And I started thinking, I want to talk to Fred Correa some more. So I went over to Fred's house one day, knocked on the door. I had trouble finding where he lived. His wife let me in, and Ted came out of the woodwork, and we sat down at the kitchen table, and he started telling me stories in addition to cutting his hair. He got very friendly with Ted. He knew a lot about Ted, and he was quoted in the Gazette on many occasions on conversations, things he had in common with Ted. But he said, I know the people that bought his house. What do you mean he bought his house? He was living in the Roach estate as a guest. No, he bought a house. The Gillettes. He dials up on his cell phone, gets Mrs. Gillette on the phone, puts it down on speakerphone, and I'm talking to Mrs. Gillette. And she's saying, yes, we rented the house from Ted Williams in Middleborough. In 1967, Ted bought a house in Middleborough off of Marion Road at the corner with Long Pond Road. It was part of an estate, but it had a right-of-way into the house, had access down to Parkshaw Pond where he could go fishing. In 67, this is just before he left.
That's right.
She said, we rented the house from him. And then we wanted to buy it, but he wouldn't sell it. But finally, in 1975, he said he would sell it. And she said, when we sold it, when we bought it, the realtor that they were doing business with had a key to a room that was upstairs that had been locked the whole time. And they unlocked the door, and here's all of this memorabilia in this locked room. How many copies of this? A shirt.
Okay,
Here's the shirt. Peter Cupid gave me to show you. He belonged to him. Some of those boxes ended up on the property when the town bought the Boy Scout camp, and he got one of those boxes. It had a bunch of stuff in it.
Wow.
Just recently, Peter told me that he got a letter from the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, thanking him for a copy of that. Basics, they didn't have it. Somebody, unbeknownst to Peter, sent it to them and didn't want to be known who they were, but they said, thank Peter for it.
I did.
So anyway, I've got all of these miscellaneous inputs, but the interesting thing of the whole project was Ted wasn't just teaching baseball. It was his goal to teach character and discipline. And during the camp, he would have them raise the flag in the morning. They'd have roll call. He ran it like a military camp. The dining room, he would inspect the dining room, make sure it was clean. He'd go to the dormitory, make sure that was being maintained and kept clean. So many things had to happen during that camp period, and he was on top of it every day of the week. He lived here for those 8 or 9 years. But then what happened was when he went to the Senators, the boys' baseball camp continued, but it wasn't the same as when he was living here. And it became a very strong supporter of the Jimmy Fund. And it is even today a major active organization for the alumni of the boys' baseball camp. supporting the Jimmy Fund. And every other year, they have an auction. And on July 13th this year, at the Moon Lodge, they'll be having a dinner at noontime with an auction and music and entertainment and gifts and a lot going on. And I just recently met with Joe LaRusso, who's heading up that whole group. Joe was a member of the boys camp when it was in the 70s, and he had with him another friend, Bob Denise, who was also a member of the camp in the 60s as well as in the 70s. And they are very active in continuing the support of the Jimmy Fund. So in ending my talk, I would like to say that I have some announcements for that fund, and if any of you are interested in going to that, for $30 you can get a ticket, and they would really appreciate you coming. They want to raise money. They've raised tens of thousands of dollars over the years, and they want to continue doing it. Ultimately, it'll probably evaporate, but right now it's active, and they want to keep it active. So that's kind of my story. I hope to write a book. I keep getting more and more information, and the history before the camp was established is pretty well written down in his biographies. But nobody has written anything about the Boy Scout camp here in Lakeville, and I think it deserves to be publicized. And I think it would have national attention. So, thank you for your attendance. No. That ended in 1986. The town of Lakeville took over the property. They paid $2.5 million to buy the camp. And now it's operated as a camp, as a service to the town of Lakeville. And they have to raise money to keep it going.
Do you know where?
Johnny Owen. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know where that was taken? Show them that picture.
Here we go.
That's in the living room of the guest house in Lydia Roach's estate. That's published in the Taunton Gazette, I mean the Middleborough Gazette.
You can see my belly button.
No, we can't. You know who the chief was?
Anyone know the police chief?
Johnny Irwin.
I can tell you before
That's
you-
right.
Oh, it's got the article.
They were real
Yes, Stephanie?
You had mentioned the dormitory
Yes,
being very, very long. Do you know where on the property that
exactly.
dormitory
I know
was?
exactly where it was.
And where was it?
Do you know where that roller rink is? With that?
Yeah.
In the woods behind that.
The haunted house.
If you walk in the woods there now,
Yeah.
I saw one hangar. When they bulldozed and cleared off a lot of the property, one kid's hanger for a shirt is in the woods.
Devaney.
But there are like three light poles out there, and there's evidence of the
It's the haunted
electrical
house.
system that was out there at the time. And that dormitory became the haunted house.
Yes.
And that lasted for many years. It was a big income producer. But that has since disappeared, and you wouldn't even know it was there. But that was the dormitory for the kids. Other question?
Do you happen to know where Ted Williams hit his first home run in a Red Sox uniform?
His first home run, probably Yankee Stadium, I don't know.
No, he was in Fitton Field at Holy Cross College. He just got hired by the Red Sox, and they're having like a spring training.
Oh, okay, it wasn't
It
a
wasn't a
league
real
game.
game.
Oh,
It was
okay,
a
okay.
pre-season game.
Yeah,
And it was his first time, and it was at Fitton Field at Holy Cross. I thought that was kind of interesting.
yeah, was that up in Worcester?
Up in Worcester.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I got a picture of it.
I remember going to the Sportsman Show with my dad nearly
Yes.
every year because Ted Williams was there and he was going to demonstrate fly fishing and give instructions to people that were there.
Yeah.
I don't know what year it was, I was just a kid.
Well,
Yeah,
back
I think like the late
back in the
60s.
'50s, he'd get $10,000 to appear for a week at the Sportsman Show at Mechanics Hall.
Yes,
Mechanics Hall,
we
yeah.
went to several years.
Yeah.
He went to Russia to fish too.
Oh, jeez.
I got something I want to show you. There's 17 fishing flies. The one down the bottom here is Ted Williams. It's called a slugger. The one up here is Haynes. I forgot, Wilma Haynes, I think his first name is. Wilma's son, John, was my best friend in Foxborough. Worked at the Foxborough Company. We were good friends for many years. His father made all of these flies, 17 of them, for 17 different shadow boxes.
Wow.
In 1957, Ted was invited to go up to the Miramichi River in New Brunswick, Canada. And the members of this Anglers Association, one of them invited him up. The only way you go there is by invitation. And he took to it. They ended up having him join as a member of the Anglers Association. While he was there, you had to have a guide in order to fish on the Miramichi River. He had that guide find a house lot for him on the river. He ended up building a house there, and today you can go on the internet and you can rent his lodge. It's called the White Birch Lodge in Gray Rapids, New Brunswick, on the Miramichi River. The people still maintain that lodge under his name and rent it out weekly for avid fishermen that want to go up there. Another interesting story on that lodge, he married Lee Howard in 1962. It's funny, Lee and Ted were romancing, but they were both traveling a lot. Lee was a socialite from Chicago, very wealthy lady, interested in the finer things of life. And Ted was romancing with her for a few years. He finally called her up and he says, "This is it, we're getting married. I'll meet you in Boston next Tuesday and we'll get married." And she said, "Okay." They went to Boston. They had tickets to go to the Caribbean on their honeymoon. There was a hurricane in the Caribbean. He put her in the Cadillac convertible and they drove to the Miramichi River on their honeymoon. The house was not quite complete and they were given opportunity to use a friend's house while they were there. And he went over to help finish the final touches on the house. He gave her a blank check to go shopping for furniture and dishware and linens and decorations for the windows and all like that. She had no idea how to decorate a fisherman's camp. She came back with linen tablecloths, silverware, and he gave her holy hell for it. And she could care less about fishing. So they only were married like 3 years and got divorced. All his 3 wives filed for divorce for mental cruelty. Ted had a temper and he was profane. Those that developed over the years in his childhood, but his profanity was part of his lifestyle, part of his speech. There were adjectives. And he colored his speaking with adjectives and they happened to be profanity. But they all, after they were divorced and they were interviewed for his biographies, they all said they still loved him. And the 3rd wife, Dolores, said he was easy to love. But anyway, he had Lee Howard up there in Miramichi decorating a fishing lodge. And remember Doris, he took her on a honeymoon down in the Everglades. Anyway, he's an interesting character. There's some more stories, and I've got, a lot more. I really enjoyed looking into this. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and hopefully maybe I can publish something ultimately that can share these stories. And his legacy about caring for kids and giving them discipline and a good lifestyle, things they could carry on into life the rest of their life, even if they didn't play baseball. And the Jimmy Fund, which he was involved with back in 1947, even continues to this day, having that fundraiser they're going to have on July 13th. So that's a legacy.
A question, one of the interesting things that we learned about when we moved into Lakeville almost 50 years ago was this game called blooper ball. And people, a lot of people, is this on? I guess it is, yeah. So, and I believe that Ted's name is associated with that.
Yes, it is.
And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit,
Well,
how it got started and...
I don't know how it got started, but they played that kind of a game with the Padres. When the Padres out in the West Coast League, they'd have play this little game, blooper ball. When he was with the minor league up in Minnesota, Hornsby, he was probably the best right-handed fielder, a baseball player, batter. And the two of them would go out and practice together in that little game of, what's it?
Blooper ball.
Blooper ball. With others, they would practice that. That was part of their learning experience, to get good reaction, good eye on the ball, that kind of thing.
Right, the story I heard was that it's a softball, fairly large. And you know, it doesn't look like it's that hard to hit. The problem was is if you didn't hit it dead center, it would just, you'd top it or get under it, and it wouldn't go very far. But Ted apparently was the only guy that could get in there. And of course, he knew how to swing and hit. And he could send that thing, you know, way out beyond the fielders, but nobody else could.
They still play blooper ball at John Pond.
Is it still played even
Right.
today? That's a
big thing in Chicago. I played on a ladies' league. back
Yeah, I know
in
there were
the
ladies'
80s.
leagues, yeah.
That was lots of fun.
Yeah.
You have a question?
No, I was just going to comment that blooper ball played at John Pond with a co-ed team and a women's team.
That's right.
I didn't know it was
And
still played,
also
okay,
that
good.
it was started by Ted because there were, the guys were playing baseball and he brought this in so the women would have something to do. And that's how it got started here in Lakeville.
And he spent a lot of time, over half his time was fishing. I mean, the baseball season only ran from April to September. What he was doing in the wintertime, he was down in Isla Morada on the Keys fishing.
You say fishing, was it always fly fishing?
No,
Any type of?
he did both casting and fly fishing, but basically his talent, what he liked most was fly fishing. And that's what all those flies were there.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm having a great time looking into this stuff. I'm not a good writer. I'm trying to put it all down into prose. I'm going to get some help from that. But maybe we can publish something. Maybe you can buy my book.
Yeah, Ted was nice enough after the town bought the property.
I'm sorry?
Ted was nice enough after the town bought the camp to let us continue to use his name on it. We have a letter signed by
Yes, I have a copy of that letter, yeah.
Okay.
But you had to put up $1 million to protect him from being sued if somebody got hurt.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of stories. I wish I could go into more of them, but I've had a lot of fun, and I want to thank those of you here in the audience that have helped me. It's been
There's a
good
question
time.
here.
Yes.
Didn't he play some golf down here?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
McCoy, there's a story with that.
There was a 9-hole golf course on the Lydia Roach estate, and he used to play golf with her on that estate. Also, I didn't mention, I meant to, the boys' baseball camp was only one of 3 camps. There was a girls' camp. This is from the Gazette. And up here, it says, the Ted Williams Camp for Boys, 8 to 19. Ted Williams Camp for Boys, 8 to 19. Down here, it says,
Turn it on. There you go.
okay, can you hear me now? Up here it says Ted Williams Camp for Boys, 8 to 19. Here it says Hilltop Camp for Girls, 7 to 17.
Where? What was that?
At the Lydia Roach Estate, and they stayed in the stone house. And for the girls, it advertises the activities as horseback riding and instruction, golf, tennis, excellent swimming, trips to Cape Cod Playhouse, trips to Fenway Park, and tutoring. The girls. And if you go down to that stone house today, over one of the doorways, it says Hilltop for Girls.
I wonder how much the tuition was for each girl.
That, I would like to know that.
Yeah, even for the boys too.
In the beginning, I know that in 58, when they started, they divided the 8-week into 4 2-week sessions. And it was $125 for the first 2 weeks, $125 for the second 2 weeks, $250 for 4 weeks, and you got a $10 break. It was $490 for the whole 8 weeks. What did that include? I don't know. Because the kids that came, most of them were pretty wealthy. And they had a Coke machine here. And the Coke machine was making money for the guy that ran that. The guy by the name of Steve Stanley over in Middleborough was supplying a lot of the equipment.
Sports den.
Yeah, and also Ted was a spokesman for Cesar Roebuck.
Yeah.
And when he lost his salary from the Red Sox, for 10 years, 2 5-week sessions, Ted was getting a salary from them for $125,000 a year. And he didn't have to work full-time. He could still spend time here at the camp, but he would go on trips around the country promoting. His responsibility was fishing, hunting, and baseball, but they had other dignitaries that were promoting boxing, other sports, basketball, whatever. And they were Olympic champions that were under Ted on that advisory group. There's another story there, I just can't tell you. I can't remember it all.
That's why you gotta write a book.
Yeah, right, we'll get the book. Okay. Anything else? Thanks again.
Thank you.